Okay, so we are the Youth and Elders panel, and our presenters are Nellie Cromarty. Of course, we know our elder Nellie Ann Cromarty from this morning. She's from St. Teresa Point, Nellie. And Leonard Monkman is here in place of Kevin Settee. And then we have Christine Emlott. And are you both with Red Rising magazine or just? And also Leonard is also with CBC Indigenous, right? Okay. And then we have Michael Redhead Champagne. Of course, you all know him from his keynote speaking. And we have Elder Don Robertson of Norrie House. And he is also one of the founding members of MFNERC. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to depart slightly from the questions, because what I'd like to do is ask our presenters to share a little bit about themselves. And this Youth and Elders panel is on the topic of wellness and what the good life means in the 21st century, but I would like for them to share a bit about who they are, so that we know where our speakers, who they are, and just to get to know them, as I would like to hear a bit about who they are. And so let's start with Elder Nellie. And maybe just take a few minutes. I think that we have about an hour, I think, for
Hello.
Good? Nellie, are you okay with that? Mike? Okay.
I think I'm okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Nellie Ann Cromarty from St. Teresa Point, Manitoba. I am so honored to be an elder to this event. I am so many years old. It's a great honor to be here, to go through the life that I have gone through. Never thought I would reach this age of 70 years old. I am a 70-year-old elder. I had a birthday last month. I am a native from the community of St. Teresa Point, a real native-born person. I was born in a trap line at the time when everything was pure. The methods of the birth was purely native. I was born on a trap line. My dad was a trapper, and my mom traveled with him wherever he went. And at this time, during that time of the year, when my mother was expecting me, there were two other ladies that were expecting. And my dad couldn't go to his own trap line because these three women had to be with a midwife. So there were three of us that were born at the same location, and we still communicate with each other. We're about 1 week apart. That's the story we love to tell. We were delivered by the same midwife. At that time, they really treasured the midwives at that time. And I grew up in the community. And my dad had an accident which disabled him to continue as a trapper. He had to sort of just be in the community and do his hunting and trapping around the area. He couldn't go out anymore. So I became a scholar at that day school that they had. And they taught me everything, the community members taught me everything I knew until I was 12 years old. The school only went up to grade 8. I couldn't go any further. And I had to leave the community to go to a residential school. I didn't know where I was going. They just told me I was going to a Native community. And that was, at that time, it was known as Fort Alexander, Manitoba. That was my first residential school. When I left, we were in a little plane, which was called the Norseman. Very slow plane. This old lady came running after me. She had never really talked to me, but she was my neighbor. And she grabbed me and she said, "We want you to go out there, learn what you can, and come back and work for us." That's exactly what I did. I started teaching in 1969. I'm still there. I'm still teaching. And on my birthday party, my 70th birthday party, my family, my kids told me, "We're going to have a feast for you." And I was really looking forward to it. But there was something missing. During the past few years, I had lost 3 siblings. And it was quite difficult for me to meet that date, to meet my 70th birthday. So we went ahead, had a feast, got started. And I started thinking, who's going to come? And I welcomed the people that came, quite a few of them. And in the middle of that, in walked in a group of people. They had a big, huge cake and a birthday card. And they were holding something. They came over. They gave me the card. My first class of 1969. The biggest surprise ever in my whole life. Who would think that they would remember? And that card they made up, they all signed their name on it. Even if they were not in the community, they made sure that they got a hold of that person, signed that card. Come to think of it, I should have brought that card to share with you guys. And a star blanket. My first star blanket in my life. Wow. It was all hand sewn. No sewing machine. So that was a real thing for me, to make me look back on all the work that I've tried to do all these years. And I said to myself, I must have really done something. I don't know what it is, but I must have to make that impact on those people. And they're all in their 50s now, over 50s. They have grandchildren. It was such an honorable gesture coming from them. And I was so proud of them. I never lost touch with them. I'm still in the community with them. I see their progresses, I see their successes, I see their failures, I see everything. And I'm there for them when they come to me. The thing that I try to instill amongst the young people that we're losing very rapidly is a language that we're losing. I've said this many times in many gatherings. Our language in Island Lake is one of the languages that is destined to disappear in a few years. And I don't want to see that. And I'm trying to get people to hang on to that language. It's not Cree, it's not Ojibwe, it's not the other languages that we have in Manitoba. It's called the Island Lake dialect, a combination of Cree and Ojibwe. Our language is very unique. The person that can talk our language, we can understand Cree and we can understand Ojibwe. It's a combination of both. We can communicate with these people. I had this experience a few years ago. We went to Europe on a pilgrimage. I met some native people on the street, and they said they were from James Bay, and that elder didn't talk English at all. And I started talking to her in my language. You should have seen the joy in her face, that she's able to pick up a few words that I said. And she was so happy to see someone who can communicate with her in that part of the world. That's how sometimes you see how powerful your language is amongst Native people. The other thing that I stress is for people never to forget their values and their virtues. These are my top priorities in my teaching. I want them to know what these are. I want them to keep it. You can see for yourself that young people are losing the concept of respect. That's just one example. And I can go on about that, but I don't want to monopolize this. Anyways, that's a very important part for young people to know. To me, that's good life. To be able to know who you are and what you have and be proud of it. To use these things in your relationships with others. This is good life. And to be able to use the things around you that was put there for your own good. I almost lost this, mind you. I enjoy being out in the wilderness. I joined the group that were teaching or promoting the traditional customs into the communities. My dad was one of them. I lost, when I went to residential school, I had this thing that was put in my head that these were evil things. It took me a while to come out of that. And I am so sorry to say, when my dad was well, I never joined him in that effort to promote that. It was only after he was sickly and ready to die that I came to that. I am now a practicing traditional Native person. I love my language. I love the work I do. And I love people. All people. That's it.
Agasani, Nelly, you're so sweet. Thank you, Nelly. And I'm now going to ask Elder Dawn to share with us a bit about yourself. Elder Dawn? Do you want me to come down the line? Okay. He says, no, you have to go down the line. He's like, I need more time. I'm just kidding. Okay, so we're going to go down the line then at the request of the elder. So here we go. Leonard?
A life story?
Well, you could do, 5-minute life story or 10-minute life story.
1 hour life story?
1 hour life story?
Bonjour, Leonard Monkman, Dishnikai Zanamuzi, Bing Dunji. My name is Leonard Monkman, and I am from Lake Manitoba First Nation. I grew up in Winnipeg's North End. We've pretty much stayed on every single street in the North End 2 or 3 times over, been through every single school in the North End, pretty much gone up against everything that you can think about in the North End. And so my life story, a lot of my early years has to do with my grandma. My grandma was very traditional as well. Pipe carrier, prayed every single day before she woke up. I mean, before she went to sleep. When she woke up, I would go to her house. She stayed in Central. I would go to her house every weekend. Every single break, from spring break, summer break, winter break, we would go back home to the reserve on the Greyhound. And so she took me out there to sweetgrass picking, sage picking, berry picking, and just sort of getting used to living like that. And then we spent 2 years in Dog Creek together, and just sort of got used to the res life. Ended up moving back to Winnipeg, graduated at Children of the Earth High School. That high school, the things that she was teaching me was the importance of what it meant to be Anishinaabe. And, so listening to the language and sort of just being with her and able to learn from her in those ways, but also at the same time having her kick me in the ass and sending me to school every day. So she lived in Central. She would put me on the bus in the morning on the 38 Salter to go to school in the North End. So I remember jumping on the bus when I was 7 years old and going to school in the mornings. And then, going to Children of the Earth, I tell people that has helped me a lot in what I do today, because that school, being surrounded by Indigenous people, being surrounded by Indigenous students all the time, it gives you that sense of pride in knowing who you are. And that's really the thing that's missing in a lot of Indigenous youth, is having that pride to say, you know what, I'm comfortable with, regardless of whatever room that I'm going to walk in this country, I'm going to be able to hold that pride to say, you know what, I'm proud to be Anishinaabe. Whether that's at the CBC, whether that's at, you know, my job, whether that's is speaking in this room, that's one thing that school really helped me to feel comfortable with. And it's being surrounded by that and telling people, you know, you take that pride with you, regardless of who you are and where you go, you take that with you. We would live in a much different country. I know that, you know, looking at it from a different perspective, we say we're losing our youth rapidly. But I also see the flip side of that because I'm surrounded by, you know, brilliant, intelligent, creative, artistic, young Indigenous people every single day. I get to see the brilliance of our people to say, you know what, we're not losing ourselves. We're finding ourselves right now. We're finding out who we are. And, you know, a lot of the changes that we require in this country is really how do we teach our next generation? How do we teach our next generation that pride? How do we give them the tools that they need in order to be able to succeed? You know, our culture is not static. What happened 50 years ago is not going to look the same 50 years from now. So we're constantly evolving and we're constantly adapting to our situations. And, you know, what is that going to look like? My grandma, you know, she grew up very similar to Nellie here. And for me, she knew that education was going to be the most important thing for me. And so she pushed me to go to school and she told me to finish. And before she passed away, she said, you know, this is what you're going to need to make it. And so going to university, I'm extremely happy to see all of these Indigenous educators because I believe that this is the way that we need to go. So miigwech for inviting me to speak today.
Thank you, Leonard. Miigwech. I just want to comment on something that when you talked about the pride, and we'll talk about this a bit more, but even Nellie, like, you know, with this sort of cultural confidence or whatever, you know, this confidence in who you are as a person, because there's so much racism and systemic racism, and you said, you know, for you to be able to go where into whatever room, wherever, like that is so important, and I always think that that's a real challenge, you know, that how do we make sure that that gets passed on, as you're saying, like how do we prepare the youth for that? And that's a really critical point, and that has to do with your sense of self, right? So thank you. Now our next speaker is Christine Emlott. I love that last name. Emlott is her last name. I just have to say that because it's a great last name. And she's also with Red Rising magazine. So please take it away, Christine.
Hi, everyone. Buju, Anishinaabe, Ninda, Winnipeg, Dunji, Christine Malott, Indigenous Cause. My name is Christine Malott, and I am a teacher, and I also volunteer for Red Rising magazine. And I'm happy to say that I'm a proud Anishinaabe woman. I didn't always feel that way. Growing up, I was born and raised in Winnipeg, and growing up I went to school with non-Indigenous people. I was the only Indigenous person in the school I was at until grade 9. And I remember not always feeling proud of my culture because I didn't really understand it. And I didn't, I guess my mom kind of sheltered me from my culture a bit so I would fit in more because I know my mom felt that way. My mom was the first person to go to school in Swan Lake, in the town of Swan Lake, not the reserve. And my family was the first Indigenous family to go to that school. So they faced a lot of racism and name calling, and they felt like they had to kind of hide their culture to fit in. And my mom definitely, she passed that down to me, and she wanted me to fit in, so I didn't learn a lot about my culture growing up. It wasn't until I went to high school, when I went to high school with Indigenous people, and I started taking some Indigenous courses and learning about my culture through lunch programs and the AAA program, things like that. And that's when I started to really feel proud of who I am and ask those questions to my family. And it really changed my life, I would say, because growing up, I wasn't connected to any culture. My dad is Polish, and that's where I get my last name from. My last name is Malott, M''L''O''T. and I didn't feel connected to my dad's culture or my mom's culture. And I think today, culture is so important because it's so easy to get lost in today's world of, materialism, and it's such an individualistic culture that there's a lot of negativity that can come from that. And if you don't have a culture to feel grounded in, it's so easy to get lost into, go into bad things and go down a wrong path. And so I'm really thankful that I was able to learn about my culture in school and be able to ask my family those questions and then see them really teach me about my culture again. And now participating in my culture with my family is one of the most important things to me. And as an educator now, I teach in Winnipeg's North End, and I teach to mainly Indigenous people. And I see that they're not, I'm the only Indigenous teacher in my school. And when I first came in, it was my goal to really bring that culture into the classroom a little bit, because I know it's not there. And it's such an amazing feeling to have my students come in and they're so excited to hear, for example, the Ojibwe word of the day, and they ask me about it. And it's just, it's really saved me, I feel like, and I hope to pass that along to my students and have them feel proud of who they are and be able to learn about their culture in school so they can go home and talk to their family about it and feel proud. So thank you for coming today and listening.
Awesome. Thank you, Christine. I love that. I love hearing your stories, everybody. It's like when you talk about your family, it reminded me of one of my best friends, because I was kind of this first wave of urban Indian kids here. And one of my best friends was, her father was from Swan Lake First Nation, and her mom was from the town. So we grew up, again, it's like, when you kind of grow up in this urban environment and you have your culture, it actually is in your family, it's in your life, but you don't sort of identify it. And I think that one of the things that happened for me, I know personally, but I kind of heard it in your story, is that there's kind of this, because it's not within our culture, like this sort of Western worldview about analyzing everything and identifying everything and labeling everything. So the old people, you're just you were who you were. And so they gave you what they gave you. But you didn't know that was going to be necessary to almost defend yourself in a way, or ground yourself, as you said, and when you have that, when you start to identify it, it really, I think because everything's so precarious and everything is so different out, outside of our homes and our families. So, they really identified with what you were talking about. So thank you. And I love Ojibwe word of the day. I love that. I don't have to do that. Okay, my mom spoke Ojibwe too, so I love these ideas around language. Okay, so Michael, Red Hat Champagne, we heard from him earlier, but he has a lot to share, and I know he will contribute to this discussion fully.
I'm back. You thought you could get rid of me just by feeding me, huh? Too bad. I'm just kidding. Hey, what's up? I'm honored to be sitting up here with all of these beautiful people. They're all right. Just kidding. No, you guys, this is it's an honor. It really is an honor to sit with these amazing helpers in our community. I'm excited to be a part of this panel specifically because I wanted to share a story. I've been learning about who I am, who my family is. I've been learning about the history of my community, about Shamattawa, and about Winnipeg's North End too. So like in learning about all of the different places that I'm connected to and all the different families that I have relationships with, every time I uncover a new connection, I feel like I open myself up to receive more love. And when I open myself up to receive more love, I feel like I get protected, and it's protection. And so I'm really lucky that the social worker who placed me with the Champagnes remained in my life. Her name's Ursula, and she only just recently retired as a social worker. And she stuck around. And I remember bumping into her last year, on my birthday last year. It was insane. I got to meet the woman who placed me with the champagnes. And she shared with me, you know, there are some cases as a social worker that you just remember. And she's like, I remember you. I remember placing you because you were one of those kids that was so lucky to be coming from a family that loved you so much, the redheads, that they knew, unfortunately, that they didn't have the skills that they needed to care for this little baby. And they loved me so much that they made a choice that really hurt them. And that was the choice to give me up and put me in the system. And the addictions and the violence that was happening in my family, I truly do believe that in that moment, that was the right choice to make. And my mom, Sylvia, actually knew my other mom from the Champagnes, Sharon. So Sylvia and Sharon were known to one another. And I think one of the things that was so beautiful when the Champagnes adopted me was they always told me the truth. They always told me, Michael, we want you to know that you have a redhead family, you have a Shamattawa family, and they love you too. They love you just as much as we do. And Ursula, the social worker, she loved me too. And it was just a reminder for me that we can go through really difficult things in our life, but if we carry the love that people share with us, it's like an extra layer of protection. It's like bubble wrap. Keeps you safe when you bump into things or you get hurt. And so I feel very, very lucky. And even being here a part of this intergenerational panel here right now, and having had the opportunity earlier today to share some words with you guys, I was the beneficiary of a lot of love coming from this room already. And I can tell you that when I finished speaking and I had a grandmother on either side of me cover me up with a star blanket, I never felt more love. I never felt more protected. I never felt so safe. And that seems like a crazy thing to say because I just finished talking to you for an hour about things that really hurt me in my life. But in opening up and in having that vulnerability and sharing with all of you, you didn't break my heart. You didn't stamp it into a million pieces. You didn't tell me I was bad. You didn't tell me I was, boys don't cry. You didn't say any of those things to me. You said, feel what you need to feel, and we'll be here. And I think that there's some beautiful medicine in that. There's beautiful medicine when we simply love one another. And we acknowledge that it's all good to hurt. Because, yes, it's hurting. It hurts us when our sisters go missing. It hurts us when our little ones are still removed from our families. It hurts us when whole communities are disconnected from our land. It does. But we have to remember that as real as intergenerational trauma is, intergenerational love is just as real and is just as strong. And if anything, our attention needs to start focusing on intergenerational love a lot more than we focus on intergenerational trauma. Because if all we ever focus on is the problem, all we're going to have more of at the end of the day is more of that problem. So if we start focusing on the medicine and the solution, and we give our attention to that medicine and that solution, at the end of the day, we'll have more of that. So if it's love, if it's relatives, if it's family, then that's what we can do by remembering that our attention gives power. So for me, in finding out who I am and in working in the community, I realized that too often in our lives as we're learning, people like to notice and point out only the negative. And now I feel like I'm like the pendulum swinging to the other side. And I talk all the time now about noticing the good, measuring the good, acknowledging the good. I don't pretend like the bad things aren't happening though. And I think that's important to point out. We don't walk around in the north end of Winnipeg volunteering with Aboriginal Youth Opportunities with rose-colored glasses on, telling ourselves that everything is so happy and great. Are we happy? Yes. Are we great? Of course. But the realities of our communities is that the violence isn't gone yet. There is still violence on the streets. The reality of our young people is that addictions still have their holds on too many of our relatives, our brothers, our sisters, our nephews, our nieces, our grandchildren, our neighbors. And it's important for us to find a way to name and address those real challenges that our young people are facing right now. And I just wanted to take this moment to acknowledge that there is a group of helpers right now in the north end of Winnipeg that are trying to develop a solution for something that I know is affecting all of us. Crystal meth use and prescription pill abuse amongst our young people. We cannot pretend that it is not happening, and we have to be able to find a way as a community to address the hurting that our young people are feeling that pushes them to use those pills and to drown themselves in that crystal meth. We're losing too many people, young people, old people, our relatives on the street. People are leaving right from hospitals right into becoming homeless. And in all of these situations, at the root of it all, there's trauma. So what do we need when you got a boo-boo? You need a Band-Aid. You need healing. You need medicine. And so we have to figure out what the medicine is. What is the Band-Aid? And maybe the Band-Aid in the short term is removing yourself from that unhealthy environment. Maybe that's the Band-Aid. But we also have to make sure that we get some medicine in there too, right? So that we can heal. And we have to be able to, I think, find a way to pay attention to that solution, whatever it may be. For Meet Me at the Bell Tower, violence was the problem and the solution was community building. For our work with child welfare in CFS, in my neighborhood, in the R2W postal code in Winnipeg, 1 in 6 children are in the care of CFS. We're the most apprehended postal code in Canada. And for us, our solution to child welfare was strong families and connecting families with helpers like me, people who don't have children. CFS can't really hurt me. They can't take away my children. And so I like to go and hang out with parents that are struggling with CFS, and if they're nervous to ask a question, I'll ask it. If they want information that they need from the system, such as simple information like am I in the family enhancement stream or am I in the child protection stream, but they're nervous to ask, I will ask. And we try to pair up families and community helpers together, build up our system literacy so that we can understand the complicated legislative framework that child welfare is, and help and be relatives and be family to one another. And so the medicine in this example is to treat our neighbors and the people that live in our community with us like family. And I'm really, really lucky to be sitting here not only with some amazing knowledge keepers, but also with these beautiful souls from Red Rising magazine. And I think that Red Rising magazine is a beautiful example of our young people saying, up, 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 world. You don't get to tell me who I am anymore. I'm going to listen to the knowledge keepers that told me that I'm supposed to be proud. I'm going to listen to my relatives who went through Indian residential school and kept that knowledge safe and sacred and intact so that today I could benefit from it. It's important for us to be critical when we are listening to the news or reading newspaper. This is where the Red Risings of the world become so important, teaching our young people about critical thinking and media literacy, so that as we are observing the rest of the world, we don't get these wrong misconceptions that being Indigenous means being drunk. We don't get any of those negative conceptions that being Indigenous only means bad things. Publications like Red Rising I'm not even Red Rising magazine on the panel, and I can't stop talking about that. But Red Rising magazine, I firmly believe, is filling a void that our young people need to see. They need to see other Indigenous young people challenging the narrative that the mainstream is putting out there, because the narrative that the mainstream is putting out there is incomplete. It notices our deficits without acknowledging our gifts. And so you don't get to do that anymore, world, because Red Rising magazine is going to call you out. And at the Bell Tower, we have a megaphone, so we will be loud. And we will make sure that the young people know and understand that in 2017, if you're Anishinaabe, you be proud of that. If you're Innu, you be proud of that. And hold your head up, because we're lucky to be here, and our knowledge keepers kept our language and those teachings safe and sacred so that we could do this work here today. So it's our responsibility to fulfill that role today. So It's the knowledge that's been kept by our knowledge keepers that makes it possible for any of us to say the things that we have.
Agosani. I'd like to just comment on one thing you said, Michael, which is one of the, I think because too, I'm so fortunate, I feel, in my life to have had, you know, my families are from the, you know, Treaty 5 and Treaty 9 territories, and my dad is from Norrie House, my mom was from Muskrat Dam. But what it gave me was, as you say, these knowledge keepers, and so we're so fortunate when you talk about your redhead Champagne family, like what that gave you, and the love, and also I think it's like the love is like a discipline. There's a practice in it, and I always think that our old people have that so strong, like this, as Nellie was talking about, this life on the land, and it's a practice. It's a way of being, and it's very generous. It's very generous in terms of its compassion, and it's very generous in terms of just listening and being not judgmental. And so I feel like this idea of like values and love and all of these things that become, as you say, our resilience, it becomes, let's look at those good things. And I think that, you know, we have so many challenges, as you said, in terms of the system literacy. And one of the things is, you know, together, I feel like we can start putting together or in place the systems that reflect our values and how we want to create environments for wellness and well-being and health, and even in terms of legal systems, you know, all of those things. So that's what really MFNERC has been about. It's, you know, it is a manifestation from Wabung, which is, you know, from 1971, where the elders had talked about an education system, a First Nations education system. And so, you know, MFNERC grew out of that commitment to our shared knowledge and our values, and creating an environment that will make us stronger and resilient. And so you participate in all of that. And I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Elder Don Robertson. I mean, he's one of the people that made MFNERC possible. So Don Robertson, Elder Robertson, the mic is now at your end of the table. And we look forward to your presentation.
I agree with Tina. The hope for tomorrow are these young people. And because Michael and I did share a cup of coffee this morning. So. I was the one that spilled coffee all over him. I don't like to tell my story because there are people here I've known for a long time, and they know better. They know me better than I know myself. But I guess two things. One is one of the real challenges that I think we face is to admit that we're really good people. That if we get beyond all the negative things that have happened to all our people, what we'll find is a people who are strong, who are self-reliant, who are self-governing, and who never really depended on outside people to get things done for them. And one of the things that I think is very difficult for us to, at least for me, to get a hold of is that I still have those skills and those abilities if I give myself the opportunity to do that. I was reading a story from somebody said something about York Landing or about Churchill and the people that lived up there. And said they left their community to go to the trap line, and when they got there, they settled down for the winter to trap and fish and make a living. And the person that was talking said, and when the spring came, we made 4 canoes and we went home. You didn't get that. They said, we made 4 canoes and we went home. One more time. We made 4 canoes. So they were able to, without going to anybody else. And they wanted to get home because there was all water, right? And they didn't bring canoes with them when they got there. So they built these 4 canoes, and they went home. And if you think about that just a little longer, and you look and you think of the kind of skill and creativity, because they couldn't go to Walmart to buy anything, right? So whatever they used to build those 4 canoes to go home that spring was done all over the land, and was done with the skill of the people, the skill of the people, and for me what I struggle with is that to have that kind of to have that kind of determination to be able to say, yes, I can. I can do that, the same as they did. I can build something, do something that will get me to where I want to go. And I have ancestors going back years that have proven that. And if they could do it, and I have their blood, then I should be able to do it too. For me, that's the thing that in my old age, that's what I think about now. Because I thought at one time when I was young, I'd change the world, right? And I found out that I couldn't even change myself, so I thought, well, maybe I should do something I'm good at. The other thing, I guess, is that one last thing. If I lose the very thing that made me a human being, that made me a Cree man or whatever I am, I'm kind of mixed, but a little bit of Scottish. But at one point in time, back in the 60s, it was really hard to be an Aboriginal person because outweighed racism and that kind of stuff. So I thought, I don't have to put up with this. I've got Scottish blood. So I thought, well, I'll be a Scottish man. Rather than, should be better being Cree than being Cree. So I thought, well, maybe I'll find out about Scottish people. So I started reading about them. Well, Scottish people, the reason they came over here is because they were starving. So I thought, well, I might as well starve a Cree as well as a Scotchman. And so since then, I know I'm not Scottish, but since then I've worked hard at being the best Cree that I can be, and sometimes it's hard. But one of the things I say is this. If you really want to see somebody that's really good, if you really want to see somebody that's really creative, if you really want to see somebody that can change the world, look in the mirror.
Aw, that was funny, Don Robertson. Oh my goodness, what a wonderful panel. I always think, as Elder Robertson was speaking, I was thinking that, you know, it is that teaching that we've been here for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, that there's no way we could have, you know, sustained ourselves as a people. And despite everything that's happened, we're still here, and our knowledge is still intact. And so we're incredibly fortunate. So I'm going to ask these questions that are directly related to the topic, which is a good life. Mino pimatizwan. Mino pimatizwan. Nelly. Am I saying that okay? Yeah? Because you know what? That's hard not being a speaker, right? It's like, I have to say, trying to learn Cree is so difficult for me. And I know that sounded like poetry. Maybe I could put it in Red Rising. But, you know, my mom spoke Ojibwe, and I actually heard the language a lot more because so much of my mom's family didn't speak English. So I did hear Ojibwe a lot more. But I find it so difficult, and I try really hard. I try and do my little language exercises, like Cree for a day, Cree every day, read it. I have my tapes, how to become a Cree eavesdropper. It's like, do you guys remember that? Okay, the older people in this room will remember this. This is from the national, I'll get to the panelists in a second. I just have to tell you this little story. National language, it was the Aboriginal languages. Yes, okay, thank you, Don. And they had this thing, how to become a Cree eavesdropper and how to become an Ojibwe eavesdropper. So back in my day, when we would have that little tape, you know, the tape, put it in, it could get mixed up and all caught. But it would go like this. Awenakina, Nina, Ganakanapik. Oh, Kenny, Pete the Gray. And then you hear, and oh, Kenny, Apieta. Ow. That was my Cree eavesdropping. Okay, so Mino Pimatiswan, it's like, okay, so what does it look like, sound like, feel like? I'm going to just read these questions because, you know, I thought that we had a lot of time. Now we only have half an hour. So I'm going to tell you what is on these this questionnaire. In your opinion, what ways, so you can talk about this in relation to MFNERC. So again, like a system that has been put in place, you know, as Indigenous people, for Indigenous people, and in terms of our own system, and how we've been trying to, how this system has worked so, I mean, it has been a primary aim to change the curriculums, to have local curriculums, to have them in any of the 5 Indigenous languages. So in what ways have MFNERC community partnerships helped learners to achieve Minopimatizwan? And in your vision for our children's futures, how can MFNERC community partnerships grow to further support learners? So how important is it for the learners? And how will it foster that continued development? So you can answer any of those questions. Or you can talk about MFNERC specifically if you want, or if there's a partnership with MFNERC, or you can just talk to us about, the idea of Minopimatiswan, this wellness. Mm.
Sorry. Hello. I think I touched a little bit on that. knowing yourself and knowing what is you, what makes you you. You know, that's what that healthy of mind, spirit, physical being, and the other one. Just my mind just went blank. There's 4 things that just knowing those things, it's so easy to identify those things. And you look at yourself. I do a lot of this in my classroom. Make the students look at yourself. Somebody mentioned this morning, name 3 things. I do 5. What is it that you like the most? What do you do the best? What do you enjoy the most? These things. To be able to identify that in a person. And then you just go on from there and you tell them, how can you improve on that in relationship with others? There are challenges all the time, but if they keep those and they don't forget what they have, they will be a happy person. And to be able to be happy wherever you are, that's a good life. To be happy, even if things are difficult. If you can remain happy. In this teaching I do, I promote traditional teachings, traditional ways, so that they can ground their feet really on top of the world. And to know where they come from, to know the people that have been before them, to know what each of these people have contributed to that person, to the individual. What did they give? To be able to recognize these things, to be able to recognize what's going on in a community, that you are a part of this community. That's, I think I just touched base. I have other people to think about.
Miigwech. Thank you, Nellie. One of the things that I was thinking as you were talking, you said to be happy even when things are difficult. I used to think that that kind of speaking, like from my mom and my family, was kind of, well, you don't really know what's going on in my life, I used to think, as a daughter. I think you don't know about the complications of this modern world and how difficult this is. But you know what I've come to realize as I'm getting old is that it goes back to this discipline of the mind and emotions, and it is a practice. It is a discipline of our people, and that the way that people think is very important. And so a lot of times when we talk about the medicine wheel or the 4 directions teachings or the 4 parts of ourselves, like that becomes like a mental construct, but the practice is really, like when Nellie talks like that, it just reminds me so strong, like those are the teachings, that is the teaching. And I used to think that my mom didn't get it. Like a lot of the times I think, she doesn't know how complicated this is. But the truth was she did. She knew, she'd been through it all. And she was sharing this stuff, and it was like, that's the practice. So I love listening to this. And I had a thought as you were talking, and I just want to put this out there because we have the youth speakers coming up, is one of the problems that, you know, when I was young, I used to think people would say, oh, do self-esteem stuff, you know, if you have good self-esteem, all this kind of language. I had no idea even what that concept was because I felt so alienated in this society. Like, I mean, it was a long time ago, but, you know, I think that, like, how is it that you see the work that you do contributing, I guess, to those young learners? And just on simple things like that, like, how does it impact people's, like, lives, you know, in terms of the work that you do as young people? Yeah.
I was thinking about today, talking about journalism and how I got involved in that. And we talk about all of the different stereotypes that we see about ourselves in the media and how we've always been on the front pages and we end up on the 6 o'clock news and we're the drunks, we're the rapists, we're the thieves, we're the thugs, we'll rob you downtown. Right. And you think about, like, I was saying to somebody this morning that what inspired me to get involved in journalism and having that love for reading since a very early age and reading the newspapers when I was when I was 8 years old, and then seeing somebody's picture in there, you know, Rosanna Deerchild and Trevor Greyeyes, seeing that picture of Indigenous people writing for a newspaper was enough to inspire me to want to get involved in that. And so I see myself written into the pages of the newspaper where it was like, these people are writing for the Winnipeg Sun, I want to do that someday. Or else seeing, you know, Jim Compton on the Sharing Circle, like, holy crap, there's people on TV where I can see myself and they look like me and they look like my family. We can see positive reflections about that, you know? And I was also thinking about intergenerational trauma. We talk about all of these crazy things all the time. You know, we're studied to death. We're more likely to get killed. We're more likely to be incarcerated. We're more likely to be, you know, 5 out of 7 is this and that. And so we're studied and we're overanalyzed to death. And we talk about all of these negative things. And we talk about lateral violence. And I didn't even know what the hell that was 2 years ago. I was like, what the hell is this? I Googled it. And it was like Aboriginals doing this against each other. And I was like, what the hell? I didn't even know this thing existed. But to think about, like, you know, flipping that, and I was joking around yesterday saying intergenerational roasting skills, where, you know, I remember watching my mom when I was a kid just, like, sit around at the table and just make fun of everybody else and everybody's laughing. And so you sort of picked up on those skills where it's like she's got all of this wisdom and she's got all of this laughter, and despite every single thing that we've ever been through in our lives, like, we've been through so many ups and downs and I've seen her struggle so many times. The one thing that she always was able to maintain was a sense of humor. Mm-hmm. And so she passed that down to me, and you know, like, the ability to be able to laugh during hard times is one of the things that kept our people alive. You know, and you think about what are some things that keep me happy, you know, and it's having that one thing to look forward to, or have something to look forward to next month. You know, there's so many obstacles and barriers in place for people that live inside the inner city or people that live inside the reserves where there's a lack of opportunities or there's barriers involved. You need to be able to have that one thing to look forward to. You know, there's so many problems in our community. I think that when you think about it, at the end of the day, what we should be striving for is health. You know, community health. That's the goal of everything that we do. That's the reason why everyone goes to school. That's the reason why we believe in education. And so instilling that confidence in my kids, like, I just wanted to say thank you to Nellie and thank you to Tina. Mother's Day is coming up. Congratulations. Happy Mother's Day to all of the mothers in the room. And thank you for today.
Okay, so for me as an educator, I'm always thinking of ways that I can teach my students resiliency, teach them to be well, to take care of themselves, and to ultimately live a really good life. And that's something that I think about in my own life as well. And things that helped me in my life. And what the good life means to me is returning to those traditional ways that have been lost. Because our people before settler contact, they lived the good life, and it was, no one was left behind, everyone was equal, and everyone had everything that they need. And today it's really hard to live a good life, I think. especially if you're not connected to your culture, because we live in this capitalistic society where everyone is for themselves, and it's a very individualistic society. And how do we instill those traditional teachings and values when we're always competing against each other for whether it's resources, funding, money? And in my own classroom, I like to make sure that I'm not bringing capitalism into the classroom, and I'm really trying to instill those traditional teachings of generosity and compassion and collaboration instead of, pitting my students against each other for the best grades or whatever it is. And one thing I get them to try and do is think about the good life, and I use the medicine wheel and the 4 parts of the self, and I give that to them, and I say, I want you to set goals for each of these 4 things: spiritual goals, mental goals, physical goals, and emotional goals, because part of our teaching is to be balanced, right? And I give the example, and I say, if you're only focused on one of those sections, say whether it's physical and you go to the gym every day and you're eating healthy and you're just super good at sports. A lot of my students are into basketball. And I say, is that going to make you a happy person? And a lot of my students are like, well, yeah, maybe if I'm really good at this sport and I'm healthy, I might be happy. But I have to remind them, I say, well, what if you're only concentrating on that and then you're not concentrating on your schoolwork? Or you're not spending enough time with your family because you're always at the gym? I say you have to be balanced, and you have to look at those 4 things and not forget about the other 3 parts of yourself, because we need to take care of ourselves and be well. And, if you take care of yourself, then you're able to take care of others. And I think the most important thing to take care of yourself, you need to have hope for the future. Because if you don't have hope for the future, then what's the point of taking care of yourself? What's the point of being drug and alcohol free if you don't see that there's a hope for a better future? So that's why I get my students to set those goals for themselves so they can have something to work towards, and they can be hopeful that they can live good lives and help people and be generous and do those things that are traditional ways of life for us. So that's what I do anyways.
Christine, thank you. I love those stories about your students. And even this idea of the competitive nature of grading, that, talking about that, that's a really Indigenous aspect or way of doing something. That's really cool. I love, and I love the idea that the children have this space, that your students have that space in which they can go and know that they have you there for that. That's again, passing it on and creating that opportunity for children.
Yeah, and I think we might forget that we're teaching in a British system of education, right? And those British values aren't our values, and we're teaching in that, and it's really hard. And that's why I'm really proud and inspired by the MFNERC, because you guys have the power to change the education system and to bring education into a First Nations perspective. And
yeah.
And we're actually, Red Rising Magazine is hosting an idea jam because we want to start developing curriculum and lesson plans for teachers to be able to teach in a different way, not only the content that they teach, but in the way that they teach. Yeah. So that will be Monday. May 17th, I think is the Monday, at 4 o'clock at R.B. Russell High School. And we invite you guys to come out and give your perspectives on education and what kind of resources do you need in your classroom to be able to teach better and to be able to come away from that British system and to put our own traditional values into education.
Cool. Now it all makes sense why I hated competing when I was a kid. I wouldn't do gymnastics competitions because I was 5'6" when I was 10. And then I wouldn't do, but I never spoke in class either. I wouldn't do any public speaking all through school. This is so interesting. I really love that. Thank you. And Michael?
What's up?
So,
What's up? So I was recently in Hamilton, Ontario, and represent Hamilton. Woo! And I had a chance
Yeah.
while I was in Hamilton to connect with some of the folks from Six Nations. And there was actually a group of students who came to my talk. It was called the Hamilton Prayer Breakfast. I had to talk to 700 people. It was a little scary, but it's okay. But you know what made it better? What made it better is that those students opened the gathering. And those students opened the gathering with the Thanksgiving address in their language. And they were in grade 4 and grade 5.
wow.
And I think the most beautiful thing about it was listening to these little ones not only share their language, there was 3 of them, 3 little ones, but what I loved about it was seeing the way that they interacted with one another. Those little ones were not, when somebody would struggle, they didn't muscle themselves in front of the microphone and say, I know what the right words are, I'm gonna say it. They would gently get the attention of their friend and whisper softly in their ear what the answer was, so that that person, even though it was difficult for them, was able to say the language themselves and share the teachings that are present in our language with all 700 people that were present. And it was absolutely beautiful for me to see, because I hardly ever see adults doing that. And the first thing I said when I went up to speak was I acknowledged those little ones. And I said, there's nothing that I'm going to say that these young people have not already demonstrated in their example of supporting one another to be able to say their language and gently nudging one another and encouraging each other in a good way, so that everyone gets that taste of success. So everybody feels like they did good. And I pointed that out because the mayor and like the police chief and like all these people were in attendance. They're like, do you know which leaders in this room I trust? These little ones right here. And I think that our children truly are our spiritual teachers when we think about those 4 directions, when we think about those 4 parts of who we are. Yes, right now there may be 200 bodies in the room, for sure. But there's also 200 hearts. There's also 200 minds. There's also 200 spirits. And if we truly want to get our messages across to our young people, like they are loved, they are valued, we cannot speak only to their mind. We have to speak to their spirit. And the only way that we're going to be able to do that is if we speak in our languages. And even though I don't speak the language that these children were speaking, I could feel it. I could feel what they were saying. And listening to those little ones say these ancient languages that I knew our ancestors were hearing loud and clear was so encouraging to me. And at the end of it, they actually gifted me with this pin that I'm wearing here today. It's got the Six Nations flag on it. And I wanted to bring those little ones here with me today, and the spirit and the teaching that they shared with me into this presentation. Because when I think about First Nations education, when I think about the opportunities I've had to travel to other territories and learn and listen, it has almost always been the knowledge keepers, the older ones that share the themes, and then it's the little ones that are the example. They give the minutia, the specific example. So I hear from our knowledge keepers about the importance of sharing and caring, but then I see the little ones and they are living it, and that's what I want to be when I grow up. I want to be those little ones. I want to be able to speak. I want to say thank you to the ancestors and the Mineral Nation and the Star Nation in my language, so that all of our ancestors will understand it. And I just absolutely think that that's amazing. And there are so many beautiful teachings. I was told, as I was learning about knowledge, right? I'm from Shamattawa, northern Manitoba, Swampy Cree territory. I was asking, like, what are ceremonies? Because most of the teachings I've been given growing up in Winnipeg here have been from the Anishinaabe community. It's been a lot of pipe ceremonies and medicine wheels and those teachings. And so when I ask about the Cree teachings, I ask, like, somebody tell me, I don't know. Where do I find them? And I'm told that it's in the language and it's on the trap line. And it's by connecting to our language and connecting to our land that I will know who I am as a Cree man. And I look forward to those opportunities because, I'm just figuring it out. Maybe one of the next generations of concrete Indians, but I don't want to just be part of the city. I want to be part of my community too, and I know that the government has tried for so many generations to rip all of us apart from one another, and the best act of resistance that we can have is to continue to love each other and to say, you may remove me from my family, but I'm always going to go home. You may try to remove me from my family and my culture and my identity, but I'm always going to go home. And it's all of our jobs in our communities to make sure that we're there on our reserve, in our territory, with our arms open, saying, welcome home, my boy. Welcome home, my girl. This is where you belong. And if all of us can do that in our different territories, we will be able to make a dent in youth suicide. We'll be able to make an improvement in graduation rates. We'll be able to improve health outcomes. We'll be able to reduce our participation in the injustice system. So it's really important for us to be welcoming. And so I think about, I'm a board member for Marymount, which is the largest child welfare nonprofit in the province right now. And out of all the children that Marymount cares for, over 80% are First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. And they recently underwent some organizational stuff that I think is exciting. It's a 105-year-old Good Shepherd agency, all right? So it came from the Sisters of the Good Shepherd. But in the last number of years, they have really made efforts to work and connect with our First Nations, Métis, and Inuit community. And now over 50% of their board of directors are Indigenous people, including myself. And I think that that's something that is important because you don't get to just pretend that you're listening to Indigenous people. You have to make it so in the way you structurally are operating. And just yesterday, I was able to go to Marymount and participate in the opening of a teaching lodge that has been built there. I went with the elder Wambadi, he's Dakota, and we were able to go into the bush last summer and pick those trees ourselves. And holy man, let me tell you, it is a lot of work to go and pick trees for a teaching lodge. But anyway, moral of the story is full circle. I was able to sit with the knowledge keeper and many people from Marymount yesterday and learn about that teaching lodge and about some of the ceremonies that are going to be taking place there. And I wanted to mention that because if a 105-year-old Good Shepherd agency can make a goal to have 50% or more of their board be Indigenous, to begin developing a land-based program for our children, to hire Indigenous youth mentors, if they can do it, there ain't no excuse for nobody else. And I really wanted to share that example because, I mean, it's a good example. Let's celebrate the good, right?
Yes.
So yeah, anyway, thank you. I think that's a good example.
Thank you, Michael. I'd like to just, like when you said that was a lot of work, I was thinking about how, the old style, like Don talked about it, where they would build their canoes. Like people were innovative, creative, strong, and that was the way of our people. And I would like to acknowledge our elders that are here, because when you were speaking, I was thinking about all the work that they've done, our knowledge keepers and our language speakers, to fight to have the languages within this system and within their system, and to create, to never give up and creating this environment, for this kind of learning, for our learning, and for at the community level. Because I know that there is a lot of leaders here and elders that fought many levels of government and fought for legislation, even at the federal level, for funding, so that we weren't even funded. But again, it goes back to that thing of like, we're just going to do it, and this is how we have to. This is who we are. That's how we do things. And so I just want to give a round of applause for all the elders that are present that work so hard to keep these systems intact for our own systems. And Dawn, do you have anything more to share on this aspect? No? Okay. And I know that Elder Nellie Ann Carmody, related, yes. She wants to share some final words. The mic, Mike. Oh, you must have heard that a million times. Okay, yeah.
I just want to take this opportunity to comment on the efforts that's being put forth by MFNERC. They're in the right direction. I know there's still lots to do, but the things they have been doing, they've been involving the elders, the young people, the communities. They've been to communities to see people of the different communities, and all the work that they have done. I just wanted to acknowledge them. They're in the right path. That's what we need.
Thank you so much to our panelists. Again, we had Nellie Cromarty, Elder Don Robertson, Leonard Monkman, Christine Emlott, and Michael Redhead Champagne. So thank you so much, you guys. An amazing panel. Truly, thank you. And I have to say that one of the thoughts that I had when they were talking, when you talked about the British system, and then even when Don was talking about I was going to be a Scottish man, one of the things that I had done a research project actually with MFNERC about 10, 12 years ago, and it was on a suicide prevention strategy for the region. And we had a advisory committee of elders, youth, educators, First Nations educators. And that was one of the main statements that they had made, was that, you know, the Western ways of, the Western systems are not even working for, you know, their own people, you know, in terms of these prevention mechanisms. So that was like one of our, and that's what I heard so strongly here today, is that we really need to look to our own systems. We really need to look to our own knowledge for our own systems. Like, even like the non-native systems, they don't work that great. You know, the rate of suicide amongst Canadian youth is like higher than almost every single Western nation. So really, we're gifted, you know, with our traditional knowledge, our knowledge keepers, and the creation of these systems, and these young people that are like moving forward and just really, really making their space in terms of the cultural, political landscape of Canada. So congratulations to all of you. So proud of you. And Gitshimigwet Chegasani to our elders. Now you all get to your next workshop? I'm just kidding. I'm just making this up now.